From Carolla One Studios and Gina's house and Brian's house, this is the Adam Carolla Show. Adam's guest today, the president of the Copenhagen Consensus think tank, Bjorn Lomborg. With Gina Grad on news, Bald Brian on sound effects, and Dave Damashek is here for good sports. And now, his home haircut resulted in 5 pairs of broken scissors from his Brillo hair. Adam Carolla.
Yeah, get it on. Got to get it on. No choice but get on a mandate. You get it on. Thanks for tuning in. And thanks for turning someone on to the show. We appreciate that about you. Right, Gina Grad?
That's right.
Handball, Brian.
Cool.
There's a little sunny bunny. All right, let's see. I made some notes I wrote down, and I'll get into that. First, I was talking to Dr. Drew. He was in here earlier, and we're taping our show. And we had we have some interesting discussions. One of these was a new term I'm going to coin, which is Magic Spackle.
Okay.
People now, everyone is now carrying a can of Magic Spackle, and they're able to smooth over all the holes and crevices in their stories.
Okay.
That I've noticed, and it's making it difficult to get at the truth anymore because everyone sort of has a Magic Spackle. You see it in the news, you see it with politicians, but you see it in a micro way with friends or family or something like that. So I've been vexed by this brown can of paint I've had for a while. And I was telling you about that, Jose went to Home Depot. He ordered a can of Swiss coffee, white Swiss coffee. Oh, by the way, there's a danger here. The labeling. The labeling I'm always talking about, like sort of the danger of mislabeling things. Navajo white is darker than Swiss coffee. So one color has the word coffee in it, and the other has the word white in it. The one that has coffee in it is lighter than the one that has the word white in it. But thus, if you call it Swiss coffee and you give the can to Jose and it has brown on top of it, it looks like coffee.
Right.
Anyway,
we just call it Brian Brown now.
Yes, the spackle of life. Enjoy the spackle of life. So it'd been bothering me for days. I finally showed up at the shop with the can because what I'm trying to figure out is how is it you said to the guy at the Home Depot, give me a gallon of semi-gloss interior Swiss coffee, and he gave you a can of brown exterior flat. How did that happen? And finally, I hadn't seen Jose since the incident, but I showed up with the can, and I did find Jose, and I said, Jose, how did this happen? Like, I'm really curious. And he said, I just went in. I told the guy behind the counter, I need Swiss coffee, semi-gloss, interior. And I said, and he didn't want to see a color swatch or ask for a color code or anything. He just made you up a random can of brown.
Of exactly the opposite of what you asked for.
Of exterior flat and handed it to you. And he's like, yep, that's what he did. And I'm like, I think you busted out your spackle on this one. Well, first off, it says on the can exterior, but all right, it says flat exterior, but okay, that's what he did. And he said, yep, I told him that, and that's what he did. And I'm like, okay, that seems like that's a weird attribute to have for a guy who works at a paint counter.
Yeah,
which
his whole life.
You wanted interior, make it exterior. You want it glossy, make it flat. What else can we do for you, sir?
Would you like executive decisions?
Would you like a paint stick I could put up your ass? So, okay, but that's what, according to Jose, that was the exchange. He just told him what he wanted. That's exactly, he just gave him the opposite, and that's what he gave him. So I'm sort of wondering, all right, that sounds a little dubious, but super convenient for Jose, like, right? He just went and told him everything, and the guy did the opposite of everything he said. And then he said, and when I dropped it off at the other warehouse, I told those guys, before you paint, check with Adam. I'm not sure if this is the right color.
Oh.
I said, okay, but they put it up 10 minutes after you left. Well, that's what they did. I'm like, so you just told them this thing. Yep. And they just didn't do it. Nope. Or is the spackle out again, or have we put it away? I mean, like, I don't know. Roberto's a good dude. He's dutiful. And when I say, tell Roberto, don't do this, he doesn't do it. Now, there could be a miscommunication, but what I'm saying is this how you and your magical spackle can would have liked it to go, or is this how it went?
Yeah, it's a favorable explanation for him, for sure.
But do you guys feeling more and more of that in this new world order we're in, where people are just going, here's how I wanted it to go, but that's not how it went, but I've decided it has gone this way?
It is patented Michael Scott from The Office. What would you like, Michael? Well, I would like all of the credit with none of the blame.
Right. So you told Roberto, don't put this paint up until you talk to me on a Thursday afternoon, and I show up Friday mornings. He had 100 other things to do, but yet he just painted the bathroom brown because he's a rebel. He's a wild stallion that can't be tamed or
can't be bridled.
Does he get $23 an hour and do what the fuck I tell him to do? Anyway. So as he was explaining to this to me, I was thinking I was picturing the Magic Spackle coming out, but in my paint metaphor. But I was also kind of thinking, I'm not sure. How would we pursue this? How would we fix it? Or what is it that we could do to remedy this if this is, in your mind, how this went down?
Yeah.
I still pointed out that the can said in big letters, exterior, flat on front. Like that you could have looked at. Okay. But other than that, he did everything right. Everyone did everything wrong around him, and that's his story. Now,
just one of those days.
The question is how much of that does he believe? See, my argument is that the line between what actually happened and what you would have liked to have happened is now completely blurred. That's
yes, the same in your mind. Yeah.
How would I like this to have gone down? I think, look, anyone who has a spouse and who gets sort of accused of, I don't know, there's a bunch of stuff that happens when you're married. It's like, I don't know, the kids' sports on the weekend, and there's two versions of you missing your daughter's volleyball game. There's one version where you drink too much, sleep in, and just kind of whiff. And then there's another version where your wife gave you the address to the wrong gym. And you headed down to the one in Conejo, and she was at the one in Pasadena, and you spent your afternoon driving around Conejo looking for the address when, in fact, it was that. Now, when we're being accused of ignoring our daughter and missing her volleyball game, we all wish we had the version of it where you go, hey, you gave me the wrong address, and I went to the wrong gym, which may or may not have happened. We all wish that, but now we're making it happen, even if it didn't. That's kind of the difference.
It's interesting that you mentioned it's a newer phenomenon. You mentioned it's like a newer phenomenon, right? This is something that feels like it's come on in the last few years.
It feels like it was the opposite of the coronavirus. It only affected the kids. It only affected the young people. They were most at risk of this magical spackle can they all had. They were all born with, but somehow as they got older, we got all the spackle out of the can and they had to throw it away. Yeah, it's now infecting the rest of our environment. Sorry.
I know everything doesn't come back to Trump, but it does feel like in this specific case, this is a sign of the times. Like the day that Trump was inaugurated, Sean Spicer went out and was like, this is the biggest ever witness, blah, blah, blah. And then like the pictures obviously told a different story, but it doesn't matter. It's like, Kellyanne Conway goes on with alternative facts and, like the strategy appears to be just lie, and if people call you on it, be like, yeah, big deal, I said it, it's out there, and there will be a percentage of people who believe you. You know what I mean? And they're kind of banking on that. I wonder if that's sort of seeping into our consciousness as like, oh yeah, just put it up, put the version of the truth you want out there, and maybe people will believe it.
Oh, it's on. Yeah.
Yeah,
sure.
it's the gauntlet's been dropped.
Well, what happened with the information that we thought was going to settle all the arguments, it just led to more information that we could use as ammunition for the argument.
Right.
So
Right.
it used to be there was a sports almanac, and you just have to go figure out who hit the most home runs in the National League in 1978, and then you just go look it up and settle it.
And that
was it. You had a sports almanac. That was it. Now there's so many different. If you find that the information that you find of who hit the most home runs in 1978, if you find you disagree with that, you can go find another sports almanac.
That's
and if that one,
point of view.
if that one if you disagree with that one, there's a third, and there's kind of, it's infinite. It's all on your phone. So there's definitely that. That is definitely something that's going on.
And if you run out of almanacs, you can simply say, well, that's my truth.
Yeah.
Right.
And
that's how I feel.
Yeah.
Right. I know Steve Yeager hit the most. That's what I know. So the concept of the Magic Spackle, interesting, and people are busting it out more and more. And I don't even think it's almost as if, what you do is you remove yourself from the equation. Like, I went in there, I told this guy behind the counter, this is what I need, and that's what he handed me. And then I told that other guy not to put the paint up, and I handed him the paint, and then he put it up. And so I'm covered. You know, I said to Jose, well, the next time you want Roberto not to put the paint up, don't give it to him.
Indeed.
Hide it. So now, and I like Jose as well. I'm just trying to figure out how we can get answers to these questions if this is our approach, if this is the way we're going at these things.
I think I'm going to start combining answers when I've done something wrong. And I'm going to start with what you said. I'm going to say, all right, first, here's how I would have liked it to go. And then I'll give you that one, and then we'll get around to mine. The reality of what happened.
In a totally different note, I always think about this. I was sitting around my house. I was listening to sounds of San Francisco, or the San Francisco Sound. It's one of those groovy, probably Sirius XM or Pandora stations or something like that. It's got a nice eclectic mix of San Francisco sounds from the 1970s and into the 80s as well on occasion. A song that I realize is I hate more than most any song that I've talked to you about, but I've never really, I don't think I've talked to you guys about it, but it's a song that I hate. There's a couple things I hate. I hate it when songs capture something that's going on today, like a saying or something, like even a song like Jive Talking by the Bee Gees. You know, it's like they hear Jive Talking on a couple episodes of Sanford and Son, and then they go, we got to write a song called Jive Talking. And it's just a lot of jive. I like the Bee Gees, but it's a lot of jive talking. All that jive you did to me in your jive talking. And then they grab something that's out of the headlines or on the zeitgeist and then just sort of write a song about that. Sure. I always hate that. And I always hate songs where they just keep saying the same thing over and over again, where it's got no nuance, it doesn't unfold or anything. And the song Get Up and Boogie, who sung that song?
Silver Convention. Silver Convention, kind of a one-hit wonder. But if you can say hit,
there was everyone, for some reason in 1975 and a half, everyone had to work boogie into they'd go like when they had to leave, I got a boogie, you know, or boogie on down, or we all boogie. And so people just writing songs like, there's a song called, Get Up, Boogie, Oogie, Oogie.
Oh, yeah.
It's just like the same fucking thing, but nothing is as bad as Get Up and Boogie. We'll play that for a second. I don't know that they say anything else in this song. Oh, they say that's right.
Sweet. When does the song start?
I always love saying, I'll turn to Sonny about 10 minutes in. I'll go, what do you think the name of this song is? Oh, they're going to take a turn. Boogie! It's just all they say is boogie. The song was a hit.
Was this song made like specifically for the roller rink circuit, or what was the point?
I'm not sure what the application
for meditation. Transcendental meditation.
To annoy me 45 years after it was composed, perhaps? I don't know.
It's at number 2 on the U.S. charts.
It says here they're a German disco act.
Oh, yeah.
There we go. Yeah.
This was the lead single from Get Up and Boogie. Also the title track.
Get Up and Boogie.
That's
all
really
right.
good.
It's a horrible song that nobody enjoys. And I was sitting there being angered at it because it was a little. There's certain songs they play that I like and some that I don't. But the following song that came on after, and Get Up and Boogie doesn't end. It just goes on for 5 minutes, but then doesn't begin. You're right. Then George Harrison comes on next. And I realize how much I love this song and how much I love George Harrison. But I thought to myself, is there a human being that loves Get Up and Boogie and loves My Sweet Lord? And if there's not, then fucking one of them's got to go. Like, you're programming the station. If I was programming a station, I'd be going, this is a great song. The other song's horrible, but the person who enjoys both hasn't been born. It hasn't been born. So what are we doing here? Like, I understand, Red Hot Cheetos, but not on caviar. You know what I realized? What makes a song great? And is this a Phil Spector song? He must have engineered it. He must have produced this. Here's my point. What makes this song is the backup singers who do a sort of woo, that kind of go up and down. They do like a ship on a high seas, kind of go, oh. You'll hear it when they come in. You'll hear them do this up and down thing, which is a great backing vocal move that you probably haven't heard before. This is Phil, right? No?
Yes.
And George Harrison, yeah, Phil working together. Phil Spector, yeah.
I was looking up if Phil Spector also did He's So Fine. I thought maybe you got those confused.
Now you'll hear it, but Phil needs to be let out of prison. Think about that man's contributions. So you'll hear him do that whoop thing, which is really interesting and unique that I never really drilled down on or thought about. All right, turn it up, Dawson. It's coming. You'll hear it. All right, here it is. It's that. It's so good. Phil needs to be let out of prison. He shot one person in the mouth.
Yeah. Bring this to the field hearing.
Yeah, think about all the great he's brought to us.
Thank you.
Anyway, Get Up and Boogie, you didn't think it could be worse or get worse, but when you put it up against George Harrison, it's just fucking, it's a
really magnifies it.
Fire.
Where are you on 1987's I Got My Mind Set on You?
It's good. Everybody suffered in the mid 80s. Everybody had it hit everybody a little bit, sort of like AIDS to the music industry. Like they all got a little 80s.
Full-blown pop music.
You see them like you see these guys, even Bob Dylan, even my beloved John Hyatt, all these guys, like you see pictures of them from the 80s, they're wearing a blazer with the sleeves pulled up like a stand-up comedian, you know, and like a bolo tie or pop collar and like gel in their hair. And all of a sudden, the greatest musicians and composers and songwriters from the late 60s and like the mid 70s, they got a little gel. Maybe it was cocaine, but they all kind of suffered a little bit.
Right.
You know, they got a synsonic drum out and a bass that had no, what would the head on that bass be called? You know, the bass guitar with no headstock on there. I didn't, they all, everyone got like a picture of a beautiful woman from 1986. She's embarrassed at what her hair looked like, right? Like, I don't care how glamorous and how sophisticated you were. If you're a hot chick or not, we can find a picture of you with fucked up 80s hair.
And
you
how
just did it.
I had two perms.
Right. It's so George Harrison is, as much as I love George Harrison, and I like that era as well. It was not what it was in the early 70s, mid 70s, just because he was infected by that. You can see the styles too.
But I'm trying to think of like when like the couple of Traveling Wilburys hits really broke, because that, you know, that's a super group that was kind of 80s, but those songs are kick ass. Like End of the Line, and
it was very late 80s, I think.
Yeah, I guess they were
80s.
on the other side of the curve.
Yeah, the tough part was like maybe 84 to 87 or something. Like after that, it calmed down.
That MTV launched in 82, right? So like that's the era when like the George Harrison of the world, maybe not him himself, but the people who were big in the 70s and could kind of hide behind the album covers. Like, hey man, you need to look cool. You need to get on MTV. You're going to sell some records.
This was like the talkies. These were the new talkies.
Yeah.
Right. All right. Let's see. Matt, the Porcelain Punisher, alerted me to an HBO commercial that he had found a couple of weeks ago, and I just kind of had it in the evergreen hopper, and I hadn't played it yet. And it was the reason Matt sent it to me, and the reason I think he thought it would gel with me, is this new direction we're going in as a country, where people are sort of they're sort of rolling around in their own misery a little bit. It's a kind of I started noticing it with comedians and other personalities, just like talking about what a neurotic mess they are all the time. Like, oh, I'm such a mess. Like, I'm such a mess. I'm such a neurotic mess. And it's like, no, you're not. You're a really successful guy who's a good dad. Yeah, but I'm a mess. You know, like this fighting to be a mess. You know what I mean? Whereas back in the day, people burned a lot of calories keeping up appearances, right? Like I'm not going to let people know about my personal whatever going on. I'll put my tie on. I'll put a little
suffer in silence.
Put a little dippity do in my hair, and I'm going to leave, and I'm going to whistle a happy tune as I go down the street. But it's like a lot of like, oh yeah, and it felt a little self-indulgent. You know, don't get me wrong. I like self-deprecating, and I pray that everyone feels like a piece of shit, especially in my orbit, but it felt weirdly narcissistic to talk about how miserable you were, how neurotic you were, or how bad you were, or how frightened you were all the time. It felt really self-indulgent, but no one would accuse you of being a narcissist because you're talking about what a piece of shit you were. But I've been feeling it a lot, and Matt sent over an HBO sort of commercial, I guess, and it's all the people, and it's also mixed with the weird kind of general bummer mentality we're all getting into these days. But he sent this over, and it's HBO. It's all the stars on HBO and their various projects, but who they are in real life and how it's okay to feel.
And if you stream shows, this is what plays right before the show you're about to watch.
Oh, really? All right. Well, we'll just play it and listen to the dirt.
It's okay to think you're in a toxic relationship with the world right now.
It's okay to be depressed. It's okay if it's hard to find the words to express how you feel.
It's okay if you're feeling more cynical than usual.
It's okay if you're panicking over an inability to control your life right now.
It's okay to have trouble maintaining your normal routine while staying home.
It's okay not to feel the most fabulous right now.
It's okay if you want to curse more than you usually do. It's okay.
It's okay.
It's okay.
It's okay.
It's okay not to feel okay, it says. To talk about
Yeah.
how COVID-19 makes you feel.
All right, sorry, we can bring it down. To feel like you're in a toxic relationship with the world. I don't know. I hope my kids don't feel like they're in a toxic relationship with the world. And if my daughter said to me, is it okay to feel like I'm in a toxic relationship with the world? I'd go, most fucking definitely not. Now listen to Get Up and Boogie. And fucking dance away those blues, bitch.
Exercise
like, no,
those demons.
I don't. I think you end up being in a worse mood when you watch things like that over and over again. I'm a little bit different. It's okay to have concerns about what's going on in this particular time, but is this all just cloying? Like, it's all pandering? Is it all just pandering, or what is it? Why are we having a competition to see who can play more soft piano music and be more upset? Like, Lena Dunham was like laying in her bed. I mean, that's from her series, I guess. But the point is I don't know. Lena, you're 28 and fucking rich. What's going on?
You know what I think it is? Just a venturing a guess here. Because I see a lot of this I follow a lot of voiceover people on Twitter. And it seems this thing has seemed to hit the voiceover community a lot harder than everybody else, because people are now like, I'm alone. Well, your life is alone. You're doing voiceover. You're in a booth all the time. You don't really have interaction with people.
Your life hasn't changed at all.
Now it's cool. Now you can turn the fact that you're a social outcast who enjoys being in a very closed, dark room, speaking in character voices. And now it's a commodity because we can complain about it. Now my regular life is, I don't know.
Well,
see where I'm getting there?
I did. It's kind of
at one point.
Feel like we, may have gotten a blowout toward the end of that journey, but I like the beginning part.
You know how you talk about how companies aren't mean or nice or selfish or whatever their companies? This is 100%, and I imagine Christy may sign off on this theory, that the people who they're talking to have been laying on the couch for 3 days straight streaming stuff on HBO. And what they're saying is, it's okay. Keep doing it. Keep that remote in your hand. Keep the pillow on the couch with the sheet over you. We know you don't feel like getting up. We will lull you into a sense of security. We're your friends. We're the people from the shows you're watching. And we're saying, keep streaming, keep watching, stay on your couch.
That's interesting. I was going to say, as it pertains to Christy, we should get her on one of these days for a COVID-specific commercial grade, because her company has a actual division all the time, like a crisis division, right? If a brand has someone dies eating their food, the crisis division will help. The crisis division is going crazy. Everyone is going to the crisis division for hey, how do we get people, or how to just get a message out? Everyone wants to just get a message out. And I want to think that HBO is not one of their clients. I want to think that HBO had the best intentions, but it's just so heavy-handed. You know what I mean? It's like it's dire and dour. Do we need dire and dour? It's dire and dour.
I agree. And again, Bill Maher, Lena Dunham, they're fine. They're rich. They're
I'm not worried
real
about
good.
them.
Well, maybe Lena Dunham, and let me try to put a button on this. These are people who possibly have experienced a shitload of depression in their lives. Maybe they're just depressed all the time. And now everyone else is like them, and they can finally feel good about feeling bad.
Well, I agree. And I do realize that people, especially artists, comedians, maybe even especially, wonder like why so many of them seem to be miserable when they seem to have so much going on. When you are depressed and you're younger, you put all of your eggs into the basket of finance. You go, if I just had a car. You don't even say money. I wouldn't say, when I was 27, I wouldn't go money per se. I'd go, if I could drive a car that I wanted to drive, or
nicer apartment.
Yeah, or better yet, my own home that I could work on. I love working on homes, and all that kind of stuff. That would cure everything, And I wasn't depressed. I was just, sort of middle of the road. But I found out pretty quickly money doesn't really change your demeanor, your happiness, or depression, or anything else. If you're Alina Dunham and you're more depressed, and then you make even more money and it does even less for your happiness, that's going to be the next 65 years are going to be tough, because most people are so busy chasing that carrot on that stick known as like financial independence.
Yep.
They never get there, but it's always out there. When you grab the carrot at 23 and a half, take a bite of it, and it doesn't cure what ails you, you got to, then what? All right. We have the news coming up. We also have, we have a question. Oh, let me hit line one. Someone's asking a question. Chris, Montana, 36.
Ace Man, Ball, Gina, get it on.
What's going on?
Hey.
Hey, not much. I'm doing well.
What's going on in Montana?
Not much, honestly. We are in phase 1, I guess, of reopening.
Mm-hmm.
We had a little bit of a lockdown. Bars, restaurants, and such were closed down, but as of about a week ago, things are reopening with some heavy regulations in terms of social distancing and all that, but we're kind of getting back to normal.
Evel Knievel grew up in Montana, right?
Yeah, that's right. Butte, Montana.
I don't think people know how fucking tough Montana is. Like, those are some badass gringos over there in Montana.
That's a place I've always wanted to visit. Missoula.
All I know is Nate, who we make all the docs from, is from Montana. He's like, this is a fucking scary place. And like I said, we're literally discussing his brother putting his cat down with his like 45. Like, it's a bunch. And if you watch any Evel Knievel stuff, you realize Butte, it's just hard scrabble. Just dudes fighting every Friday night in front of a bar. And yeah, it's a perfect place for Evel Knievel to come from. Sorry.
Yeah, no, you're right about that, especially Butte. Butte is, very blue-collar town, old mining town. And, that's a tough town. I live down in Bozeman, which is a little more cosmopolitan, a little more hip.
Mm-hmm. Jeff Bridges, Dennis Quaid, and Patrick Duffy.
Whoa, the Holy Trinity.
And John Mayer's around, too.
J.K. Simmons.
I could see
Michelle
that.
Williams. Yeah. So what are you doing for work there in Montana?
I primarily work in real estate.
Is that business completely affected, or do people think, oh, there's going to be some good deals out there and there's speculators out buying things up, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's kind of booming right now, especially where I live in southwest Montana. It's been booming. And even with Corona, it hasn't slowed down too much. But I do appraisals. I don't do buying and selling, but with federal rates as low as they are, everybody's refining. So me specifically, my work hasn't slowed down too much. But even with all the agents I talk to, there's a lot of interest in folks coming in from out of state. Especially with Corona going on. Again, all the agents I talked to, they said they've never had so much interest in out-of-staters from big cities, Chicago, Phoenix, Denver, whatever, wanting to move to a small town, Montana. So things are haven't been too affected in our little bubble here.
Well, it's an interesting phenomenon, and you guys tell me what you think of this. I was born and bred in Los Angeles, and so for me, no better place than Los Angeles. I mean, it's Los Angeles. I was born in the place that everyone's trying to get to, essentially. It's about basically the way I looked at it. And if you take a look at all my comedic friends and showbiz friends, they're all from somewhere, and they came here. And then if you would ask me in 1985, do you want to go to Bozeman, Montana? I'd go, no, there's nothing there. Like, or many places around, places in Colorado, Salt Lake City, Utah, places like that. Like, no, I'm in Los Angeles. I don't need to go there. And by the way, I looked at those places as sort of like there was a chasm, like almost in time. Like here in Los Angeles, it's modern times. Everything, it's like you're driving, you want to live in Salt Lake City, you're driving a Buick from the 60s. I'm driving a brand new Honda. Like that was kind of the way it felt. But now Los Angeles is kind of jumped the shark and starting to come undone at the seams.
And how?
And the places, your Utah, your Salt Lake Cities or Montanas or wherever, they've made up a lot of ground. Like they're sort of in the modern era. I didn't consider them like in the modern era. They're now in the modern era. Not only are they in the modern era, they're kind of in the sweet spot. Los Angeles is dystopian future. We're like we're Blade Runner. These guys are sweet 1993. And I feel like I'd like to go back and live that life there than our dystopian future that we're quickly coming upon here.
What I'm hearing is we're all packing up and moving, and I'm moving back to Overland Park, Kansas. And that's where the show is going to continue from.
I'll help you back.
That's right. No, we're all going.
I sent out a tweet a couple of days ago that got like 2 million views, which is very rare for me. And it wasn't even funny. I was just sort of making a bit of a joke and kind of an offhanded comment, but it had to resonate with people. Otherwise, they wouldn't have shared it as many times as they've shared it. I'd heard Newsom have a report that said, we're not going to get back to normal until we have a vaccine. So I wrote a tweet that says, Governor Newsom says California won't get back to normal until we have a vaccine. Here's the problem. California hasn't been normal for 20 years. And it's like, it's good for a chuckle, but not 2 million. Like it got shared. I don't know what you call it, shared or viewed.
Tweeted or
whatever. It got viewed 2 million times. And I was like, why? Because it must have some truth in it. It must resonate with people. And it is true. Our normal, we don't want this normal. Let's get back to 1999 normal California, and we can enjoy ourselves. Yes, Max Pata.
Yeah, it has over 2 million impressions and about 152,000 engagements at the time of me saying this.
Yeah, it's not that funny, but it strikes some sort of chord in people where there has to be an element of truth to it. Hey, Chris.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, I was talking to someone the other day, and when Jet Suite X opens up, like when Jet Suite X makes it easy and has a bunch of routes and corridors and hubs and stuff where you can just hop on, go to the airport, drop your car off in the parking, walk right onto the plane, it's going to make your Montanas and your Salt Lake Cities and your New Mexicos and your wherever look a lot more enticing. All right, let me hit DC Universe, and then we'll do some news. The Ultimate DC Membership. Watch a TV series. Let's see. Hold. There we go. And film, read nearly 23,000 DC comics, and connect with other DC fans as well. You check out the new DC Universe Rewards program. Earn tokens to receive exclusive DC swag and more. Original series, Harley Quinn. Adult animated series, season 2, now streaming, by the way. And newest series, Stargirl, premieres May 18th. Action-packed lineup of originals like a Doom Patrol, Titan, Swamp Thing, and Young Justice Outsiders. Plus, you can get the latest DC news by watching DC Daily or tuning into their podcast. Sonny's watching the bejesus out of the DC universe. It's a DC universe, right, Dawson?
Ready to experience awesomeness? Join DC Universe today to get a free 7-day trial plus 15% off your first 3 months. Visit dcuniverse.com/hellopod and enter code Adam at checkout. Again, that's dcuniverse.com/HELLOPOD. Enter code Adam at checkout. Valid for monthly subscription only. Expires 6/30/20.
All right. Let's take a quick break. Come back and do the news with Bald and Gina Grad.
The news with Grad, news with Gina Grad, breaking viral, all those crazy Trump tweets. Give me news with Gina Grad, trouble in the Middle East, celebrity drug meltdowns. Deep news with Gina Grad.
The news with Gina Grad.
Okay, real quick, with all this hot boogie talk we've been having, am I going insane, or did Eddie Murphy have a song called Boogie in Your Butt?
Yes.
Thank you. I don't know why he had it. I just want to make sure that he did, in fact, have it. Okay. So Donald Trump abruptly walked out of his COVID-19 press briefing on Monday after he became annoyed with a couple of female reporters. And this has been picking up a lot of steam in the last day or two. CBS News reporter Weijia Zhang asked the president a question, which led to a heated exchange. Trump then pointed to CNN's Caitlin Collins, but she paused to allow Zhang to finish her exchange. Trump didn't seem to like that too much. He left the podium. If you haven't seen it, here's the clip.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Said many times that the U.S. is doing far better than any other country when it comes to testing.
Yes.
Why does that matter? Why is this a global competition to you if every day Americans are still losing their lives and we're still seeing more cases every day?
Well, they're losing their lives everywhere in the world. And maybe that's a question you should ask China. Don't ask me, ask China that question, okay? When you ask them that question, you may get a very unusual answer. Yes, behind you, please.
She's Asian. She's a little confused.
What, sir, why are you saying that to me specifically?
I'm telling you, I'm not saying it specifically to anybody. I'm saying it to anybody that would ask a nasty question like that.
That's not a nasty
question. Please go ahead.
Why does it matter?
Okay, anybody else? Please, go ahead in the back, please.
I have two questions.
No, it's okay.
But you pointed to me. I have two questions, Mr. President.
Next, please.
But you called on me.
I did, and you didn't respond, and now I'm calling on
Sorry, I just
the young lady in the back, please.
I just wanted to let my colleague finish.
Okay.
But can I ask you
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Didn't respond.
She was standing right there, like keeping her distance, waiting to approach the mic.
What the? I thought that, didn't you say the other one gave her time back to the Asian reporter lady?
She said, I was waiting for my colleague to finish.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Or not like Maxine saying, what did Maxine say?
I'm claiming my time.
Reclaiming my time.
It is on, everybody. Jesus, goddamn Christ.
Yeah.
He shouldn't even, should he give press conferences anymore?
What's the point?
No,
what's the point for anybody?
Well, it's not going to work anymore because it is basically, there's a kind of I get back to sort of a couples, you know what I mean? There's a version where you want to sit down and you want to solve a problem. And then there's a version where you just want to sit down and you want to explain to the third person in the room, like the therapist, what's wrong with that other person. And then they want to say what's wrong with you. And then you want to make this case. We talked about it before, but I'm saying is I think we've crossed that threshold with Trump. He's going to have everyone's loading up a gotcha question. He's going to fire back with more gotcha shit on his side. And it's not even worth doing it anymore.
Yeah. Objectively, it feels like he's doing more harm than good, both to himself. The people are just believing him less, but also like he's not giving out information. Like it's more, combative, like you said, than actually giving out information about COVID.
I agree, but if you listen to the way a lot of the questions are phrased, it's not even. Some of them aren't even phrased as a question. They're just like Jim Acosta's just giving him gotcha, making comments that aren't in the form of a question, and that's what's pissing Trump off as well. So I think it's a two-way street. I think they could both, reporters could ask questions and he could give answers, or he could give answers and they could ask questions. It'd be a better it'd be a better world. But I don't think we can do that right now.
Not much
I
of
think he should just
substance is
stay
coming
in.
out of these.
No.
Yeah. I'm looking for the tweet. I do believe Jimmy Kimmel got a significant shout out from the president in the last couple of days. An honorable mention, if you will.
He just literally
find that.
I sent him we're on a text chain last night because Jimmy gave a very eloquent rebuttal or something to this Twitter war. Jimmy was making fun of Pence in a sort of gotcha moment, like a hot mic moment. The story wasn't really what Jimmy had portrayed. Not that Jimmy cooked it intentionally. It's like what happens is there's 30 minutes of tape and you have a segment producer and they show you the first 45 seconds and you go, oh, good. Yeah, let's run with that. And if you watch the whole thing,
tells a different story.
And I'm not, first off, there's a little fog of war. Like there is an element of when you're prepping a monologue, you don't have 37 minutes to watch an entire C-SPAN clip of Mike Pence. You just don't. You rely on people around you. They show you the clip, they show you the bite, and you go run with it. Put it in the teleprompter. Let's get it going. So Jimmy had basically made fun of Mike Pence in this sort of gotcha moment of Mike Pence, who was delivering supplies to a hospital, photo op, the vice president is bringing boxes. Because you guys, anyone who's moved knows you can't do it with college students. You need the vice president. And once in a while,
Call the administration.
I'll have like the ambassador from Greece or something like in a pinch. But to really move boxes effectively, you need guys in three-piece suits.
Right. We've all seen the trucks going down the street, starving vice presidents.
Starving politicians.
So they're doing the dumb photo op where Mike Pence is going to help carry boxes into the hospital with the things that the respirators or, whatever the equipment. And he does the first couple of boxes, I guess, and then he gets to the next box and he's got a mic on and he says like, this box is empty. And then he kind of makes this joke, or as much as Mike Pence can joke, I guess. He says like, you want me to carry it in for the film crew anyway, or something like that. Like you want to carry an empty box.
Right.
Now, in my world, all of the boxes are empty because there's no reason to have the vice president moving boxes with fucking dust masks in them, right?
Right.
We have a donkey can do that. So like symbolically, they're all empty if you really think about it. But he got kind of caught saying that into a live mic. Jimmy pounced on it, but it turned out that Pence knew it was empty, knew he was kidding, and kind of was in on the joke. So it wasn't a gotcha moment. Jimmy pounced, Pence like fired back, and the next thing you know, Jimmy spent his like Mother's Day weekend answering tweets from the president. But anyway, Jimmy gave a very funny, a poignant, interesting monologue on Monday night's show or Monday night show. And so I sent him a text. I guess I was on this text chain with, I don't know how the text chain works. I really don't. Sometimes it's me, Jimmy, and Daniel, and Cousin Sal. And then sometimes it's me, Jimmy, Daniel, Cousin Sal, and Jeff Ross. And then sometimes it's me, Jimmy, Cousin Sal, Daniel, and Bill Simmons. And I don't know how the other people get there. And I also don't know when I'm answering. Am I just answering Jimmy or am I sending it to Jeff Ross and Simmons too?
Just be careful and try not to talk too much shit because you don't know which thread you're on.
They for sure have DTA text chains.
So I think there was one where Jimmy was, I don't know if it was Daniel talking shit about me for not washing my hands. And then I wrote back and Jimmy said, like in defense of me, like, well, to be fair, Adam hasn't used soap in 20 years. Like this isn't
on any part of his body.
Right. This is not me taking some COVID-19 stand. This is something I was into in 1999. And And so we were having fun back and forth. But at some point, I said to Jimmy after this monologue, I said, and this is interesting. I said, so it was him doing his monologue from home, 5.5 minutes. We don't have to look at it, but it was a very nice mixture of comedy, and it was poised, and it was funny, but it was also well thought out, and it was articulate, and it was a nice piece of work. You know what I mean? And I said to him, when you first started going without an audience, it was a little weird seeing someone doing a monologue, late night monologue with no audience. But that monologue that you delivered tonight wouldn't have been possible with an audience. You can't take that kind of time. You can't let it breathe. You have to weave in jokes. You're also playing to the tempo of the audience. You're not going to stand there. 5 minutes and 46 seconds doesn't sound long. It's a long time to be standing there without a bunch of jokes, and talking more about feelings and nuanced feelings. So I said that, well done. And also kind of interesting that you went to a place that you wouldn't have gone to in front of an audience. And we have that now as a byproduct of no audience.
Right.
Now you're going into more interesting territory and interesting places that you wouldn't have gone into. And then I think Max Zapata, I can't remember, every once in a while I'll have a flashback to something from the Man Show. And I told him it was his best work since he inducted Scott Baio into the Man Show Hall of Fame in like 2002. We used to induct people. We had the Man Show Hall of Fame, as I realized it. And of course, it was always based on nailing a bunch of banging everyone in Hollywood.
Sure.
Was the Scott Baio Hall of Fame. We've never looked at any of those Hall of Fame bits, have we?
No.
I don't think so. Not here.
I think we've inducted a few people into the Man Show Hall of Fame, and I think Jimmy inducted Scott Baio into the Man Show Hall of Fame. And and as Jimmy wrote back, ha ha ha, he wouldn't come to the. We would invite you to be in when we inducted you into the Man Show Hall of Fame. We would invite you to take your prize, but Baio didn't want to take his prize because the only way you got inducted is if you fucked a lot of 22-year-olds you were working with. That was basically, I would have showed
That's
up.
something to be ashamed of?
Yeah. So anyway, Max, if you ever find it, you can tell me.
I haven't found it yet, but I will tell you this. On scottbaio.com, in his biography in 2005, TV guy named Baio, one of the greatest teen idols of all time. He was even inducted into the Man Show Hall of Fame due to his impressive dating history and leading Hollywood ladies. So
nice.
It's in his actual website.
Can you imagine in the Me Too era being putting the notion of somebody writing an article on you in 2005, like, oh, he loved the ladies. Right? Oh, he was prolific.
Really plowed through them.
Yep. All right, Gina, sorry, what else?
Well, Tesla CEO Elon Musk reopened his production plant in California in defiance of the state and local stay-at-home orders and even challenged the authorities to arrest him. The billionaire made the decision to restart the production just days after he sued Alameda County, that's up where he is near San Francisco, to reopen the plant and also threatened to move the facility out of California. Musk pointed out that other auto companies in the country have been approved to reopen and believes Tesla is being singled out. He assured workers the company has taken all necessary safety precautions, providing PPE. And speaking of photo ops, we reported last night that he even said he was going to be on the assembly line with the workers. So, and he said, if you have to arrest me, just, give us a chance to get some stuff up and running. And President Trump weighed in, said California should let Tesla and Elon Musk open the plant now, all caps. It can be done fast and safely.
Who was Max Pata? Drew was talking about some city council woman that just told him to fuck himself or something.
From San Diego.
You can find that one. But I have thoughts about this. First, I want to tell you about Jb Weld. That's right, DIY projects, and you want to get through those. You want to save money. You want to avoid paying the repairman who you don't even want in your house these days. So do it yourself, big or small repairs. home or garage, ordinary household glue. Well, it's ordinary. That's what it is. You need something strong. You need a better choice. And that's why Jb Weld is a proud sponsor of the Adam Carolla Show. They're great. I know the owner. I've hung out with these guys. I think I met them at SEMA a few years ago. I use all their stuff. I've always used Jb Weld because it's a back in the day they just made the like muffler repair stuff and that kind of stuff. And now they make everything. So keep it in your toolbox or your kitchen crafts box, wood, metal, plastics, whatever, and more. That's all. It can all be repaired. Don't glue it. Jb Weld. Available at jbweld.com, Home Depot, Lowe's, AutoZone, Advanced Auto Parts, O'Reilly, Walmart, Amazon, Michaels, and more. Elon Musk, first things first, he is a perfect example, like he may pick up and move or who knows, but Elon Musk is a perfect example of F me money. He's got FM money.
That's right.
I'm so glad you said that. I tweeted that to you when the story
Brian
broke.
is so happy.
And a number of assholes were like, oh, it's not fuck me money. He's going to save money in the long run. Fuck you. First of all, you don't know that he could move to Nevada and 2 years later they could change their law about, what a shock. They're raising their taxes on corporations. But it is exactly fuck me money. Thank you so much, Adam Carolla, for saying that.
Thank you, Brian Bishop. Yeah, and it's FM money, not FU money. FU is, I'm in a FU bracket. He's an F me bracket. And that, he can fuck himself up and he doesn't care. It's worth it. It's the ultimate reason to have money is to do that.
Even if he does save money in the long run, ostensibly, he's losing a huge amount of money up front. He has to relocate his business, build an auto manufacturing plant, and hire an entire new workforce in another state. It's a huge outlay of cash, but it doesn't matter to him because he's super fucking rich, so fuck him. I mean, he says, fuck me.
And so here's the thing. He would like to reopen his business. And remember, we like electric cars, and he had Lorena Gonzalez, assemblywoman representing San Diego, just tweet, fuck Elon Musk. But,
to the point.
First off, I don't know. Is this the person we want making policy? He said, I want to reopen my factory and I'll do it in a safe way. I'll have the spacing, I'll comply, and I'll do it at 30% capacity or whatever the story is. And Alameda County went, no, you can't do that. And it's like, I don't know. Why not? Why can't he? And also, you do understand that whether you're Elon Musk and you're Tesla, or you're the woman who had the hair salon in Dallas, Texas, you understand that people can make the choice not to come in.
Right.
Like if people don't want to enter your hair salon, they do not have to enter your hair salon. They make that choice for themselves. And they see how you're doing your distancing and you have a station outside and are people wearing masks and are they numbering the people who come in the salon? And if they don't like what they see, then they don't have to enter the salon. We are missing something that is uniquely American, which is Elon is deciding what to do with his company, and he is the person who cares the most about safely continuing. He doesn't want to get lawsuits. He doesn't want to have people come down with COVID-19. He is going to do that. And also, if there's somebody who works for Elon Musk and they're pregnant or they're at risk or they have diabetes, they then can decide for themselves whether they think it's safe to go back to work or not. We seem to be glossing right past that part of our society.
Right.
That's a very important part of our society. So she was just like, fuck Elon. And then Elon is like, he's the last car company in California. California had a huge car culture. I think Toyota moved to Tennessee or somewhere around there. Nissan may have moved to Tennessee, or Toyota went to one of the Carolinas or something. These huge companies that employ tons of people and create tons of revenue and taxes, they get up and leave eventually because the politicians treat them like shit. Like they really just they treat them like some sort of change purse, and when they're done getting the money out of them, they just sort of discard them.
They drove them away, pardon the pun.
Yeah, pardon the pun. And I don't know who this politician in San Diego is, but be glad that Elon has decided to set up camp in California with SpaceX and Tesla.
Oh, yeah.
And not only is it a thing where not only do you get the tax revenue and the job creations, but you get the prestige of having a SpaceX in your town or in your community, and same with Tesla. It's cool. It's cool that the innovators are here.
Well, and it's our main examples when we talk about the coast or we talk about California being the cutting edge. What's our example going to be? You know, we say we have SpaceX, we have Tesla, we have Silicon Valley.
Right. Nissan moved from Gardena to Franklin, Tennessee in 2006 with 1,300 workers, and Toyota moved to Texas in 2014 with 2,000 workers. These are big companies that generate a lot of jobs. I would be fighting to keep them, but okay. So bizarre. You guys notice right and left, kind of a weird thing with politicians kind of thinking they're the stars. Like it's like a weird thing going on where and it's kind of true. Like Barack and Michelle Obama are much bigger stars than anyone in Hollywood, but there's something going on. There's a kind of a status going on now versus serving the community or ask not what you can do for your country or ask not what your country can do for you kind of thing. Like there's a new world order where they're just making decrees. And it's getting a little, I want them to reel it in. Oh, you have,
not just that, but like left and right. They're all TV stars. They all want to be on the shows, the whatever. They're all during the hearings or whatever. They're all playing to the camera. You know what I mean? It's a look at me thing.
Yeah,
I think I have to be like that to get into politics.
What? Say it again, Brian.
Sorry, I think you have to be like that a little bit to get into politics.
Well, certainly these days. We got the Scott Baio Man Show Hall of Fame.
Season 1.
Welcome back to the Man Show. I'm Jimmy Kimmel, and this is the Man Show Hall of Fame. Hallowed walls. Walls erected to honor the great men of our time. Men like, well, nobody yet, because it's the first one we've done. But you have to start someplace, and that someplace is Brooklyn, New York. The date, September 22nd, 1961. The day a child was born. A child that would ultimately change the course of television history. His name was Scott Baio. In 1977, he burst into our consciousness like no one since the Beatles. As Chachi Arcola, streetwise nephew to the Fonz, he captured the imagination of American teenagers searching for a hero. Chachi was that hero, receiving 5,000 fan letters a week. More than co-stars Donnie Most and Anson Williams combined. Those were happy days indeed. The nation so loved this genial young Italian that in 1982, ABC gave him his own series, a spin-off star vehicle called Joni Loves Chachi. Yes, alas, Scott's talents were both underused and overestimated, and Joni Loves Chachi died a quick death at the hands of network brass. But he would not be deterred. Later that year, the big screen came calling, and with it, the beginning of a remarkable partnership with fellow teen idol Willie Ames. The movie was zapped, and the results were magical. Scott returned to his first love, television. Again paired with the mop-top Ames, Charles in Charge began an extraordinary 7-year run. But even more extraordinary than Scott's professional career is his personal life. While Ames spiraled into oblivion, Baio has been linked with some of the most desirable women in the world. Heather Locklear, Nicolette Sheridan, Brooke Shields, girl who was on Growing Pains. Melissa Gilbert, Beverly D'Angelo, Nicole Eggert, and Pamela Anderson. To whom he was engaged. Yes, an impressive list. Impressive indeed. And it grows longer every day. Right now, somewhere in Hollywood, Scott Baio is quietly humping the bejesus out of yet another spectacular babe. But how? Why? How does a man of such limited ability bag Heather Locklear? How does Chachi get Pamela Anderson? Is he a hypnotist? A warlock? Perhaps he has a pact with Satan. Satan?
He shrugs.
Don Barris doesn't know. All right. That's good. You get it. I forgot we used to do Man Show Hall of Fame induction.
I'm looking at Wikipedia. The other inductees, Andre the Giant and Frank Gifford.
Wow. It's quite an impressive list.
And this honor is also included on Scott Baio's IMDb page.
Oh,
so
right. God, really riding this one.
That Man Show. Well, we'll look for Andre the Giant for another show. I remember that one being kind of funny. We'd have to fill up the calendar every year, so it's like every year is like Man Show Hall of Fame. I will do that in show 13. That's one thing we could do, and we just keep. That's how we just fill it in. But I forgot Manovations, all that stuff. It was a funny show, actually. I missed that show. Indeed. All right, let's do one more, Gina Grant.
All right. Well, NBC News reports that Facebook put misinformation warning labels on about 50 million pieces of content related to COVID-19 during the month of April. They announced that on Tuesday. The social networking site attaches these warnings to posts sharing articles that have been reviewed by the company's independent fact-checking partners. The company said the warnings greatly reduce the number of people who even view the content. So that's probably a good thing.
God, 50 million?
Yeah. 50 million pieces of content related to COVID-19.
Are humans doing this, or are they looking for words?
I mean, that would make sense. They said it's their independent fact-checking partners. It could be an algorithm base.
God, it's such a weird time we're living in. I don't know. Like, I'm not sure anymore. Everyone's going to have to really super tune their ability to deduce fact from fiction and to sort of do what's right for them.
Right.
Like, because there's so much information being fed to everyone, and it can pull you in so many different directions that you're really going to have a strong base, and you're going to have to everything's going to have to pass the sniff test. Like, right. You have to go, that doesn't make sense, or that makes sense. But you need some base in reality, because otherwise it's like, I don't know. It's like if you turn on your computer and it says Gina Grad, click here to collect $50 million. Well, you can't click there, and obviously you're not going to click there, but you're also going to think, why would someone just give me $50 million? You know what I'm saying? Like, you're going to have
click
to
quick.
Right. So we're all just going to kind of need that.
Yeah.
They will use an internal system.
Yeah, it says they will use internal systems to proactively monitor the tweets and rely on trusted partners such as non-governmental organizations and think tanks to identify content that could cause harm.
All right. Where were we? One more?
We're bringing it home?
Bringing it home? Well, what was that? What was that?
That
$50
was
million.
Yeah.
All right, do one more. Let's.
All right. So I know you're not you know what? We'll do this one. This is kind of funny. A small group of Florida residents in an uproar about the state's limited business openings protested Monday against the statewide gym closures. And they did it in a way that only these muscle-bound dudes could. According to WFLA TV, a group of nearly 30 protesters, I think we have video, gathered in front of the county courthouse in Clearwater and performed various exercises together, push-ups, sit-ups, squats, whatever you could, to bring attention to the gym closures. These protests were organized to make a public statement demanding that businesses be allowed to open up despite the virus outbreak. Florida gyms aren't allowed to reopen until we reach phase 2 of Governor Ron DeSantis's reopening plan. But it kind of doesn't. I was laughing at this because I thought, well, aren't they just kind of showing that you can really work out anywhere and it doesn't have to be the gym? I mean, they're doing it on the sidewalk.
Yeah, just lift that potted plant at your own home.
Yeah.
I agree. You know, the gym, it's like it's very essential to a lot of people, but I also get where there's fluids flying around, and that seems like
maybe not.
It just seems trickier to reopen than a restaurant would, where everyone just sits 6 feet apart.
Heavy breathing and sweating.
You know, I don't know why I keep thinking about hair salons and haircuts and stuff like that, but the more I think about it, I don't know why you need a license to cut hair. Why would you need a license? Why do you need to get licensed in the state of California or whatever state you're in to cut hair? Like this is to me a perfect example. If people say to me, what are your politics, or how do you believe a system should work? I would say, I don't want the government issuing you a license to cut hair and or revoking your license if you're not doing what they tell you to do. What I want you to do is you can open a barber shop or a salon. Now, if you're working with caustic or dangerous chemicals or something, that's sort of a different story. But if you're just cutting hair or giving shaves or whatever it is, I will let you open that business, and then we will see how good you are at cutting hair.
Right.
Because no one died of a bad haircut. So if you come in and you get a shitty haircut, well, then no one's coming back and you'll lose your business. But I don't think the government really needs to be involved with the licensing. And I feel the same way about like Uber. Like you could die in a car wreck a lot faster than you could die getting a haircut. But we trust that guy to be a decent enough driver that we'll get in the back of that guy's car. And we kind of made this argument with cabs a while ago. Like when Uber came in, like, hey, these guys aren't bonded. They need a license. They need a medallion. Turns out anyone can pick you up from the airport.
Or do they?
Sorry, Brian.
No, I agree. Sorry, I was just stretching my finger. Yeah, it's weird that we would, of all things, not require, some sort of licensing or bonding for the most, dangerous thing, which would be driving someone.
You have to have a driver's license.
A driver's license, but to pick up strangers and drive them around?
I had a license when I was 16 and had no idea what I was doing, driving a car. And also the thing about hair cutting, too, is a lot of families and a lot of moms or something do it for their kids anyway. So how inherently dangerous? Why would we need the government to get involved with this? If your mom's been cutting your hair since you were 7 at home, what do we need all the licensing? And then what you get into is like, oh, we need X amount of hours, and you have to get a certificate, and you have to complete, and that it costs a lot of money. Like it costs a lot of money, and it takes a lot of time. Anyway, all right, let's see. LifeLock, Better Business Bureau is warning. I got a warning out there that posting your pictures, your graduation date, your high school name gives scammers an opportunity to piece together a profile and hack you. It's important to understand how cybercrime is affecting our lives every day. We put ourselves at risk when we put all our information out there on the internet. Cybercriminals keep finding ways to steal identities, and there are ways you could miss. If you miss the threats, you would miss the threats, I should say, if you're just monitoring your credit. You need LifeLock, the leader in identity theft protection. If you become a victim of identity theft, LifeLock can help you restore your identity easier than you can do it on your own. That's for sure. It's 2020. Protect yourself with LifeLock, right, Dawson?
No one can prevent all identity theft or monitor all transactions at all businesses. Join now and save up to 25% off your first year by using promo code ADAM. Call 1-800-LifeLock or head to lifelock.com. Use promo code ADAM for 25% off.
All right. I'm Your Emotional Support Animal is available for pre-order, which just helps if you pre-order it. I won't get into all the details, but you can go to Amazon and bookmark us and click through as well. The audiobook coming in about 6.5 hours, Dawson, I
yes,
think?
sir. 6 hours, 30 minutes.
That longer than I usually do?
It's right around there. I have all of the audiobook lengths here. In 50 Years We'll All Be Chicks is 6 hours and 42 minutes. President Me was 6 on the nose. Daddy Stopped Talking a little shorter, 5:35. Famously not Taco Bell material, 7 hours and 59 minutes.
Wow.
Wow. A lot of blabbing. I was probably talking, well, I was talking about myself the whole time.
Well, that was the one you said, let's get it over 8 hours.
8 hours would have been great.
Oh, that's the one that you got to 7:59.
Yeah.
But you told me we're over it.
They're like, yeah, we got it. And then this one is 6 hours and 30 minutes.
All right. So you can pre-order that as well. And live events coming up in Houston Improv. That'll be May 21st to the 23rd. We'll be doing a live podcast there. And then we'll also do some stand-up shows there as well. And tickets are now available. I think it's go to HoustonImprov.com or something.
AdamCarolla.com.
AdamCarolla.com and find that there, and check me out doing stand-up on our YouTube page as well. Bjorn Lomborg is coming up next, and until next time, oh, well, I do that at the end of that one. That's right. All right, thanks, Gina. Thanks, Brian.
Bye.
And Bjorn next. Bjorn Lomborg is on with us. He's he's the president of the Copenhagen Consensus Center, and I'm guessing, where are you now, Bjorn?
Right now, I'm in southern Sweden.
Good. So tons of questions to ask about that. What is your training, Bjorn? Just give us a thumbnail sketch of your background.
So I'm an academic. I'm a political scientist. I taught statistics. I did a lot of economic and statistical and game theoretical modeling. So really, all the kind of thing that'll make you fall asleep. But the reality is, what I've been spending the last 20 years on is really starting to ask the question, look, everything costs resources. What are the places where we can spend resources the smartest? So really talking about prioritization and realizing you can't afford it all. So, start with buying the stuff that actually does the most good.
Well, you're a man after my own heart, which is, you're basically just saying, I'm pragmatic. We don't have an infinite amount of money. Let's put it and allocate it to the place that makes the most sense. And hopefully we'll have enough to get to all of it someday. But for now, let's work big to small. I talked to a politician once on the show. I think it was Governor Gavin Newsom of California. And he said, I like to work small to big. And I thought, I know that sounds like a great soundbite in your mind, but it doesn't work for me. I want big to small. By the way, Bjorn will come back when his book comes out, False Alarm, How Climate Change Panic Costs Us Trillions, Hurts the Poor, and Fails to Fix the Planet. He will be back to talk about that in the near future. But first, we're really going to focus on tracking the coronavirus around the world and all the other things that are sort of connected to that pandemic. So let's discuss the coronavirus in the context of we don't have an infinite amount of money and we don't have an infinite amount of time. And what should we be doing?
Well, so first of all, I have to preface this with, I'm not an epidemiologist. I simply listen to what these smart guys say, but I also try to point out we need to think about resources at the same time. So, a lot of people have pointed out you need to flatten the curve. And that's probably makes a lot of sense. It's essentially saying don't have everyone be sick at the same time, because that means you overload the hospital capacity and you have lots more people die. That's a very bad idea. One of the ways you can avoid that is by doing some sort of social distancing. We've heard a lot about that. Basically, slow down the infection rate. But from there on, we've sort of caught on to this idea of saying, well, why don't we just slow it down enormously? Why don't we just slow it down to the point where there's no more disease? That sounds like a really good idea. But the problem, of course, is what really happens is you also shut down your economy. So what happens when you have these big lockdowns, you end up with very little economic activity, and you basically have all the problems when you then start reopening. So we're expecting basically to see a lot of the reinfection, the second waves, when you reopen. And that's why I think, and that's why I suspect you also asked me where I was just now. That's why I suspect Sweden is actually an interesting case, because Sweden, unlike most other countries, have actually been run by experts. This is not the Swedish government who's decided, but the Swedish public health authorities. And they've said, you need to lower the infection rate down below the capacity of the healthcare system. They've successfully done that, but you should not lower it down to zero, because what happens then is you simply postpone the problem. You push out in front of you all the disease and death, plus it costs a lot of resources. So the real question here is to say, how do we both get through the coronavirus without having a lot of people die and without losing our economy? That, I think, is the crucial question. And it's the one that we haven't been talking very smartly about so far.
Is this analogous, or is this a proper way to phrase this question? You can tell your kids to wash their hands with Purell and antibacterial soap and stay in a bubble essentially and don't go outside and everything else. That is fine for a weekend or two. It's a good short-term plan for your kids never getting the flu or never getting scarlet fever, never getting anything. But at some point, they have to go outside. And then when they do go outside, they're going to be compromised because their bodies have not built up antibodies. They're not fighting and working out the immune system. So now you have an unintended consequence. You have a kid who's 100% safe from any disease or bacteria for a short period of time, but when they then enter the outdoors world, they're now actually weaker than they would have been if we didn't slather them with Purell. Is that a fair statement and sort of encapsulate what we're talking about?
I think that's a very good metaphor. Again, the idea here is to recognize that having the disease run amok is not something you want, but not having any disease at all is also something you don't want, because you're basically stuck in a world where we probably won't have a vaccine or a treatment for the next 1 to 2 years. And as you just pointed out, you can't keep your kids inside for the next 1 or 2 years. And just like you can't keep France or California locked down for 2 years. And so you got to ask, how do you find a sensible middle ground where you make sure you flatten the curve enough that you stay below the capacity of the healthcare system? That's very smart. But don't go for the politically very convenient, we're going to go for zero right now, but then have the return of the virus later on.
Well, I think about it in firefighters terms, which is firefighters who fight forest fires and brush fires will do controlled burns. They'll burn off some material, some fuel. They'll do it in a controlled way. You can say, oh, that's a fire, and it is a fire, but they're sort of controlling it so that there's not a huge forest fire, because they know the notion of no forest fires doesn't really exist. So you're going to have to sort of do a controlled burn. And maybe what Sweden is doing is sort of a controlled burn.
Yes, again, it's a good metaphor. What we have to remember is there lies behind this. So we can't just sort of casually talk about, well, we're just going to burn a little bit of forest, because the real problem, of course, is there are people dying. And again, remember, in Sweden, more people have died than in many of the other Scandinavian countries. It's still a lot less in many of the Southern European countries, but that doesn't make Sweden perfect by any means. But the argument in some sense is simply to recognize that you have to look this across a long term. You can't just say, oh, we're safe right now, if you don't have a game plan for staying that way for the next 2 years. And most of the lockdown countries don't really know what are they going to do when they start open up. They're going to get many of the diseases back. And then, of course, they've given up much of their economic benefit, and they still get many of the deaths and diseases. That's, in some way, the worst outcome. So the fundamental point here is it's just not sustainable to have a strong lockdown in the long run. It's also, when you actually ask the epidemiologists, so there's a big paper in Science a month ago now that basically showed, but a lot of people have showed this, that doing something about an infectious disease like corona means you should do something, but you shouldn't do everything, because if you do everything, you basically just suppress the problem until later when you open up, and then you're going to get a huge second wave.
So is your thesis, or other people's, that not only do you sort of buy yourself time when you sequester everybody and shelter in place, I mean, you buy yourself time, but it's not you actually make it worse. You exacerbate it down the road. I mean, it's sort of like saying, I want to save money, I'm not going to pay my mortgage. And you go, okay, you would save money, but then there's going to be fees and charges and consequences and compounding interest. So in the short term, you're definitely going to save money. But again, in my crazy metaphor world, if your mortgage, and you tell me if this is what you're saying or not, if your mortgage is $1,000 and you say, I'm going to save on that mortgage and I'm going to keep that $1,000, it wouldn't be like, okay, in 6 months you owe us $1,000. With the coronavirus, you're going to owe us $1,500 in 6 months. Like, is it going to be interest and penalties on what we're doing?
So two things. First of all, you mentioned that if we shut down, or if we at least moderately lock down, we can actually buy ourselves time. And that's some people have been making this argument to actually say, well, if we could find a vaccine, if we could find a cure, we can actually do better in the long run. So there is a little upside. It just doesn't seem like it's going to come anytime soon enough. There's not going to be an interest in that way. The interest, if you will, more comes in the fact that you end up destroying your economy. So, what you've done here in Sweden, and again, people have this very wrong sense of Sweden that they haven't done anything. They've done lots of stuff. They've asked people to, stay at home if they can, don't go on unnecessary trips, keep your social distancing, wash your hands, cough in your elbow, all these kinds of things. So they've tried to make sure that there's a lot of things working, but they haven't told people, don't go to school, don't go to work. Again, they've said, if you can work from home, that's great, please do, but otherwise go to work. And the shops are still open. So what they've done is moderate social distancing. That makes sense. If you do the strong lockdown, you can't sustain it. You can't do this for a long time. And the interest, as you were talking about, doesn't come in the fact that you're going to have more deaths. You'll probably have about the same deaths, only a little bit later, but you will have a much worse economy. So again, if you have to weigh the pros and cons, you have to ask yourself, is just simply postponing this, but not actually solving the problem of the coronavirus, a good strategy? And it probably isn't. Doing a moderate social distancing is probably a good idea. It's not a fantastic idea, but it probably is a good idea.
A lot of your sort of what we'd say out in the United States, these brass tacks sort of ideas and thoughts, basic, a lot of common sense, wisdom, not a lot of pearl clutching and reactionary sort of the sky's falling kind of stuff. Obviously, it's to the consternation of a lot of people. You essentially put a target on your back through being a contrarian on a lot of issues. Now, I feel the same way at home, essentially. I'm constantly arguing with my daughter, my wife, about what is and what statistically makes sense. They're arguing from a feelings-based standpoint. Do you think of yourself as a bit of a contrarian, or do you feel like I'm just putting these numbers down and people are reacting one way or the other with it?
So I think there's a lot of people who would argue that, oh, that's just contrarian, maybe even just, for the sake of it. But no, that's not why I'm doing this. I think we do better if we have good information and if we think smartly about what we should do. Now, clearly, a lot of countries just simply jumped into the fray and said, oh my God, there's a terrible coronavirus. We got to do something. I understand that idea. But, this something will probably go on for 1-2 years. Maybe it's time we actually have this conversation and say, how do we tackle corona in a way that doesn't kill very many people and at the same time doesn't destroy the economy? And that conversation is one that gets a lot of people riled up, because everyone will tend to say, but you can't put a price tag on life. You should do everything to save every single life. A life is sacred. We should just simply spend everything we can. But there, I think it's just important to recognize we don't. We never do that. And one great way to look at that is simply to look at the US, where you have speed limits. We don't allow people to just race down with 150 miles an hour. But if we really want to avoid speed deaths in the US, remember about 40,000 people die every year on the roads. If we wanted to avoid that, we would set the speed limit at 3 miles an hour. Then nobody would die. But of course, we don't actually do that because we recognize there's also a cost. We actually would like to get to our work or to the shop or back home or visit our parents. So we gotta say, what is the trade-off between saving the most lives and actually having a functioning economy? So we have a conversation, should it be 55 miles an hour or should it be 85 miles an hour? But nobody's arguing 3 miles an hour or 150.
I would also argue that companies competing in technology can reduce that number. Not necessarily the federal government doesn't need to bring that number down. They say 65, fine. And now all the car manufacturers are competing for airbags and crumple zones and anti-lock brakes and self-braking distancing and automatic braking and whatever. I mean, we thought this whole planet was going to be underwater, in 1974, we're talking about the ozone and the smog, and I live in Los Angeles, and what's coming out of the exhaust pipe of these cars, but no one figured on the catalytic converter. Somebody invented something that didn't exist, and now what comes out of a new Honda's tailpipe, I mean, think about it. When I was a kid, if someone fired up a car in a garage, your eyes would start watering. Now, I've been in a garage with a car running and been like, is that car even running? I can't hear it. And nothing's coming out of the tailpipe. What's coming out of a lawnmower is 10 times of what's coming out of the tailpipe of that. So the catalytic converter, computers advancing and retarding timing and things of that nature that nobody saw in 1973 when we were making our dire predictions. These are things that we can't anticipate, but I do count on them as a species.
Oh, absolutely. Look, innovation is by far the best way we tackle most problems. And one of the ways that we do that is exactly as you point out, we get better airbags, we get seat belts, we get, crumple zones in cars, all these things. We should also recognize that as a society, we spend a lot of resources on making highways better with better highway design, with crash barriers and all these other kinds of things.
Right.
So there's lots of ways that you can do this. And that's, of course, the conversation that we start having once we just stop this, it should be 3 miles an hour, or we should have no dead. But you start talking about how can we smartly avoid people dying. So one of the things that people have pointed out, and that's become very clear, Corona mostly harms old people. So we should make sure that we cocoon old people much more. And that's actually, and frankly, one of the problems that Sweden has had, that a lot of elderly care homes have seen Corona come in, probably because they've had lots of different people working in these areas, not had enough testing. And clearly that's one of the places where you should make much more of an effort, and where a little bit of technology, a little bit of spending can hugely help your old. At the same time, of course, we also need to remember that, and if you actually ask very old people who are probably only have a fairly limited amount of time left over, they are not happy about the idea of just simply being cocooned and not being able to see their kids, maybe for the last time, just being caught up. So there's clearly, again, a trade-off. And this conversation we need to have. If we have this openly and talk about how do we do this in the smartest possible way, we're likely to have a much better society. But again, that requires to have a rational conversation, not one that's ideologically based.
Yeah. Would you be, I'm just thinking out loud, but I thought if they had two graphs, which was coronavirus deaths, one side was, or one numbers graph was people over 79 and people with pre-existing conditions, and another graph that just said healthy people under 79, no pre-existing conditions. I think if you had two graphs instead of one graph that just had number of deaths, the gross amount of deaths, I think we would be having a different reaction to this emotionally. I would imagine that one would be very stout and the other would be very small. And then when my 13-year-old twins and my youngish wife saw the small graph and realized they were in that group, they would process it differently. What do you think?
That's probably true. Again, we also need to make sure that we don't become callous and just say, oh, it's just old people and sort of let it go. Of course, that's not how we want to be. We don't want to be that society, but we also need to recognize that this is a disease that mostly hit old people. And so, especially in the third world, one of the things that strike me as unbelievable is how incredibly wrapped up we've been about this whole corona conversation about the rich world. Now, obviously, that makes sense. You live in California. I'm right now in Sweden. We care about the place where we are. But vast majority of human beings live in the developing world, where they're much poorer. And there, a lot of the things that we're trying to do to tackle corona probably are actually worse than the disease itself. And that's to a very large extent because many of these countries have much younger populations, and that means that there's many fewer people to be harmed, but at the same time, they have lots of other problems that are actually going to affect them a lot more.
Right. So it is very interesting that as much as we talk about the folks who live on the other side of the world, we don't really internalize it here. We're really worried about our own. And look, that's what all communities do. I get it. I'm not blaming anybody, but those policies, first off, some of the numbers that are coming out of some of these places like India and parts of Africa are pretty devastating in terms of economically what's going to happen. And you tell me if this is a correct statement. When we're as developed as we are and you are, these kinds of nations, economics don't necessarily translate into death. There's ways we can stave that off for a while before they go straight to death. But in some of these nations, the economic downturn equals death.
Exactly. And one of the things, so again, look, we're rich. So not only, as you point out, we're not going to be hit even if we have what economists call a 90% economy. We'll still be okay. We'll have slightly less of everything, but we won't be dying from this. But for many of the people who live on $1 or $2 a day, clearly having almost no income because they can't work anymore because they've been asked to shelter, but they don't have a home. They, basically live under a bridge. Clearly for them, this is a huge cost, and one that will very easily mean that they can't feed their kids. So we actually, we've been working for a number of different poor countries, and right now we're working with Malawi, which is one of the poor countries in Africa, and we've gone in and actually looked at what will it cost them to do a moderate social distancing. So not even a sort of Italy or France, but just a moderate social distancing, so sort of like a Sweden kind of thing. What will that actually cost them? And the surprising thing is it'll cost them dearly in two fronts. First of all, it'll reduce their GDP, as you mentioned before. It'll simply put them on a slightly lower growth path. Again, we tend to be a little sort of, really, does that matter so much? Yes, it does when you're really poor, because those are the opportunities for the future. Those are the things that'll actually make you survive. So what we found was it would cost about 1 year of GDP over the next 30 years in today's money for Malawi to do this. At the same time, it also means if you shut down schools, which we've done many, many places in the world, that turns out to be a really, really bad idea. First of all, kids don't actually infect very much. They'll probably keep infecting back at home and they'll meet up with others, so it won't have much of an impact. But it has a huge impact on learning. If you take kids out of school, it basically means you're stealing away from them the opportunity to improve their productivity in the long run. So we actually estimate for Malawi, there's about 6 million students out of a population of 19 million that won't go to school for 9 months. That means that they will be less productive when they reach their adulthood. That also costs about a year of GDP, or about $6 billion in total. The net benefit to doing this is that you will actually save some lives. You'll probably save about 7,000 lives. Now that sounds wonderful, and that's really worth considering, but saving 7,000 lives, but ending up costing $12 billion is an incredibly costly thing for Malawi. Just remember, right now, it's not like we're saving everyone in Malawi. Right now in Malawi, 22,000 people die every year of HIV/AIDS. 22,000 that we could probably have saved very cheaply. We actually know that we could save about 7,000 of them for $3 million. So we're talking about spending possibly $12 billion and saving 7,000 people instead of saving them for $3 million. There's 4,000 times difference. We're simply choosing a really bad way to help. And I think that's what's happening in much of the developing world, that we end up focusing so much on Corona that we forget all the other things where we could do so much more good for Malawi and probably many other places.
Well, you know, from a psychological standpoint, I started having this concept a few years ago, which is a kind of a dangerous place we're getting to, which is, and especially here in the United States, money is now invisible. It's electronic. It's a plastic card. You know, when I was growing up, if you were broke, you were broke. You had no money in your wallet. You had no money. You know, people would have a water bottle, Sparkletts water bottle filled with change and quarters and nickels, and you'd empty that out if you want to go see a movie and get a slice of pizza. But our relationship with money, and it started with pelts and gold pieces of 8 and things like that, very tangible things you had to go out and hunt and collect and fight for and maybe die for, has now just turned to swiping a card or pushing a button on our phone. And so my kids who are 13 don't have a tangible relationship with money. When I was 13, I had a very tangible relationship with money. I didn't have a credit card. No one in my family had a credit card. You wanted something, you had to physically get the money. So therefore, their decisions around money are much different than mine were. So they'll say, "I'll just get the phone out, get the Starbucks, have the guy bring it to the thing." That's like, they have no idea if it's $31, $14, or free. And frankly, they don't give a shit. And it's sad that my job is to get them to give a shit, but it's a little bit tough because I'm out of the house a lot and they've got their free money. I'm trying to make the money so they can spend their invisible money. But California is kind of that way. We look at money as invisible. We have these unfunded pensions and unions and debt and debt and debt. And the governor's like, well, tell the federal government to print up more cash and bring it over. Or better yet, just hit send on their computer and it will be flush again. So there's something dangerous about this relationship with money not really existing anymore. And it makes it very easy for either my daughter to order a bunch of Starbucks for her and her 9 friends that they don't finish, or for the governor to go, shut it down, shut it all down, print more money, take a Brinks truck and bring it over to California. And if you combined that with politicians essentially running as a popularity contest, meaning the one who can stay locked down longest is going to win the next election, that is a perfect shitstorm right there.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
And Adam, I think you're very right. I actually haven't given it much thought that people have less sense of money, and that's probably true. In some way, I mean, it's wonderful, right? Your daughter's not actually worried about, do I have enough change to go to the movie theater in my little bottle? And it's a sign of our affluence, and I guess we should also be a little thankful for that. But yes, it is problematic when people are just sort of saying, oh, but it's just money. Because remember, it's not just money. Money is only a representative of stuff that we could have done with those resources. And obviously, those resources are limited. Yes, you can print as much money as you want in principle, but it's not going to make the material opportunities for your world bigger. If you spend more on some things, if you do more of some things, there are other things you can't do as much for. And I think we need to have that conversation in the rich world when we're talking about what should we be doing about Corona, and we don't have that sufficiently. I think that will come as people are starting to reopen their economies and realizing how much we've lost. I think there'll be a lot bigger sort of impetus to saying maybe we need to get a little more realistic about how we're going to do this second time around. And of course, that becomes incredibly important if there is a second wave. Are people going to say, yeah, let's shut down again? Probably not nearly as much, and certainly not for the third wave. For the developing world, so 4/5 of the world, for the poor part of the world, this obviously is much, much more obvious. They still have a very clear relationship with money, and if they don't have, for many, wage laborers that just simply live from day to day, if you don't have your money, your kids are going to starve. And so there it has much, much clearer implications. And that's also why I think it's much clearer when we're talking about what should you do about Corona, what you should do something. Again, we're saying to Malawi, they should definitely make sure that they have testing, that they have protective equipment for their medical community, that they should cocoon their elderly, that they should make sure that people self-isolate, but they should not be shutting down schools. They should not shut down their economy, because they're actually going to generate a fairly small benefit, but a huge cost for the future. And that cost we need to keep talking about, because if we don't, we fail to recognize that we could have done so many other good things with the same amount of resources. So that's essentially what we both need to convince the developing world about, the developed world, and your daughter about.
Yeah, it's funny because I had this very telling conversation with her, which is I have guys who I'm trying to keep employed because that's it for them. I provide money for them. So I was trying to think of like sort of creative ways that they could work outside the house and do some other various things so they could continue to support their family. And my daughter just kept saying, tell them to go home, just tell them to go home. And I kept going, yeah, but you don't get it, because she lives in her home and has no context. And I don't blame her. I wouldn't either, but she really just didn't understand why I didn't just tell them to go home and stay home. She doesn't have the concept, let them use their phone to have people bring food to their house, but tell them to go home. And it's a tough concept to explain to a 13-year-old girl or a politician who's in their 50s if they really just aren't feeling the tangible sting of that. But you said, what percentage of this country, did you say 4/5 are, you gave a number of living in poverty?
Sorry, that was for
underdeveloped,
the world.
The world.
Yes,
the world.
For the world.
What is the number?
About 84% of the world is in the technically not rich part of the world. The vast majority of people, so about 6.5 billion people are not rich like us. And they have to struggle in a totally different way. And they feel this very, very clearly. And so we need to have that conversation. In some way, I think it would be a lot easier to also convince your daughter to think about, look, if you're in Malawi and your choice is to save 7,000 people for $12 billion, basically eradicate a significant part of the future progress in this country, but you'll save 7,000 people. But ignoring the fact that you could have saved another 7,000 people for a 4,000th of that cost. Why are you talking so much about Corona and so little about helping these people? And this particular thing is to get better nutrition to people with HIV. There are lots of people with HIV. If you get them better nutrition, they will survive a lot better. Those very cheap things are the things that would make a dramatic difference right now, and one that we can actually afford, unlike the other approach to tackling Corona by, basically foregoing huge amounts of economic opportunity to save 7,000 people.
Well, something I've talked about on this show long before the virus broke out, which is the death of math. The combination, I'm going to add the trifecta. Politicians that are running as a popularity contest, they're running for homecoming king. Money, which is invisible, and the general populace is death of math. They don't know about number. What you just said doesn't make sense to half the people in Los Angeles. They would have tuned out. They honestly don't. They just go, I don't know. I don't care. If it saves one more person, then good enough. And they would walk out of the room. It's a death of math mixed with invisible money, mixed with politicians that are running a popularity contest, which gets us into these kinds of sweeping proclamations, like when Cuomo of New York was saying, hey, I believe lives are precious. That's what I believe. I believe life is sacred. That's me. You know what I mean? Like, okay, but you're setting policy. That has nothing to do with policy, your personal feelings about the sanctity of life, which, by the way, fuck you very much. We all feel that way too, of course. Now we want to talk about policy. So thank you. Come down from Mount Pius, stop grandstanding, and let's talk about a policy. I know you've now made the proclamation that all lives are sacred. Good. I love my mom and Nana too, but now let's work this out. So it's problematic, as they would say. Every human life is priceless, according to Cuomo, except for that's not true. You put prices. When the World Trade Center went down, you figured out what each corpse was worth and what it was worth to the family. That's frequently done. Insurance companies do that. If you talk to Mark Garrigus, the lawyer, and you say to him, hey, LAPD cop shot this guy in the back on his own lawn, how much are they going to get paid from the LAPD? He'll ask you what the guy does, how old he was, and then he'll give you a number. So we frequently do it.
And perhaps a little less controversial, we do that all the time. We were talking about highway safety before. We put up highway safety on roads that are trafficked, but not roads that are not trafficked, because we know that at some point it doesn't pay off. We don't save enough people for the extra investment. We do this across the whole government and, quite frankly, in our own lives, right? You take precaution if you're going to go on a long trip, but maybe not quite as many precautions if you're going to go on a short trip. You certainly don't seem to worry too much about crossing the road, but if you're going to cross it many, many times, you'll probably go over to what do you call it, separate crossing. You'll be more careful. You'll take more effort into what you're actually focusing on. So again, we need to get a sense, and as you just said, a lot of people are math blind, or at least less literate. But I think having this conversation, that was exactly why I said this. You can actually save 4,000 people if you focus on the smart strategies. For every time you can save one life if you focus on the poor strategies. That's the kind of thing that for most people stand out. Do you want to save 4,000 people or one? That's not a hard question. So I think you can get people back into saying, look, it's important how we spend our resources, because we can't spend them twice. Let's make sure we actually spend them well the first time around. And in a totally different thing, I don't know if you want to get to that, but we've been looking at that for the UN as well.
Oh boy, yeah, I'd like to talk about that. I also have just sort of a global question, which is it's something about being 2020. We're the same age, and when I was young, hearing about the future, 2020, when it was 1978, 2020, that's the future. Space age, all the modern. We will have eradicated X, Y, Z, and P, D, and Q. Why so many people living in poverty? Why the third world status today in 2020? We can't spend 5 hours answering it, but what is going on that so many nations are struggling? So some are doing incredibly well, but here we are in 2020, and they're still plagued by many of the diseases and or plagues that plagued humanity in the dark ages. Like what is can you speak to that? And you don't have to give out statistics or numbers, but just sort of globally, what are you thinking?
Yeah, there's 2 points to that, and you can't ask me not to give out statistics because that's what I do. But fundamentally, there's 2 points to this. One is you and most people have a very skewed vision of what the world, how much better the world actually has become. So if you go back to 1970s, on average, we probably had about 40% of the world was extremely poor. So 4 out of 10 people were extremely poor. Today, that number is below 7%. So we've dramatically seen people being lifted out of poverty, not just in China, although China was a big part of that, but also in India and many, many other places. So look, market economies and access to global markets and the opportunity to make a buck for most people have actually meant that many, many people have been lifted out of poverty. Remember, this doesn't mean that they're well off. It just simply means they're not terribly, terribly poor. But everyone have moved up the ladder. That's an amazing achievement. Likewise for death. So if you think back, and I only know the numbers from 1990, back in 1990, every year, 12 million children died before the age of 5. Today, that number, despite there's many more people in the world, that number is down below 5 million. We more than halved child mortality. And that's because we've tackled a lot of diseases. We've actually gotten a lot of technology. We talked about how innovation works. We've managed to solve a lot of these problems. So one part of this is actually because we haven't been paying attention. Things have gotten a lot better. The other part, of course, is there's still a huge bit. There's 7% that are still poor, extremely poor. That's about 800 million people. That's still a huge chunk of the world and something that we ought to be focused on. There's still 5 million kids dying every year. That's still 5 million too many. So clearly we still have our path mapped out. And that's why I keep saying, instead of focusing on things that make rich world people feel good, we'll often focus on some things that catches our attention in the news and makes us feel like, oh yeah, that's really what we should be worried about. We should look at those big, substantial things that have huge impacts. So malaria, tuberculosis, HIV, diarrheal diseases. Those are the kinds of things that don't sound all that sexy, but just kill the vast majority of people. If we could avoid them, not only would we see a lot fewer kids die, but we'd also see more people becoming rich. Because if you don't get sick, and certainly if you don't get mortally sick, you're much more likely to be able to take you and your family up through the income grades and actually get out of poverty.
The UN, you alluded to that.
Yes. So look, the UN, I don't know if you know, back in 2000, the UN set targets for the world. Very, very simple targets. They were called the Millennium Development Goals. So basically they're about get people out of poverty, stop kids from dying, get kids into school, stop moms from dying, get water and sanitation to everyone. We did much of that. That was what we were just talking about. And this was one of the most successful things that the UN has promised for 2015. Certainly much of this was not because the UN actually managed to do it, but they got us thinking about these very simple things. So the UN wanted to say, well, let's try and set another set of targets. This was so successful. So they set what is now known as the Sustainable Development Goals. So they said, let's make promises for 2030. What should we do for the world? And they started out saying, what are good ideas? Bandied around with lots of different targets. Lots and lots of targets came in. At some point, there were like 2,000 proposals to what we should be promising. We tried to work with the UN and told them, please, 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 whatever you do, don't promise everything to everyone, everywhere, all the time. And of course, that was what they ended up promising. So the Sustainable Development Goals are now not the 7 simple targets I just mentioned to you, but they're now 169 targets where we're basically promising everything to everyone. So we're talking about getting rid of poverty, getting rid of disease, getting rid of global warming, making sure that everybody lives happily ever after, make sure that people who live in cities have urban parks, and the whole shebang. And of course, the point here is some of these things are really, really good. Some of them are almost impossible, and some of them are not very good investments. And so what we tried to get the UN to think about was basically say, where can you spend $1 and do the most good? So we actually looked through all of their targets, had some of the world's top economists look at what will it cost and how much good will it do, so you end up getting a sense of where do you get the biggest bang for your buck. So we have a big book out with Cambridge University Press, but we actually, and I have that very conveniently ready for you. So we did a one-pager. I'm sure we can get that up on your website. So basically look across all these different things that you can do for the world. And for each one of them, we show how much good will you end up doing. So long lines are really smart things that you can do for the world. Short lines, not nearly as much good. So this is really a shopping list for the world. And that's, part of the conversation that we just had about should you focus on Corona or HIV in Malawi? This is what you should be focusing on. Not the sexiest things, not the things that get the most attention in the news, not the cutest animals, but the things where each dollar spent can actually help the most. It's not very, surprising or anything. It just happens to be the kind of conversation that we rarely have, because we're so focused on sounding right and saying all the right things and saying every life is valuable. Of course it is in some way, but if we have to choose, let's make sure we save many lives before we save few lives. Let's make sure we do the most quality for the people who are left rather than little quality, so on.
Yeah, there's a lot of unintended consequences, and I've really been thinking about that a lot lately, that you do this thing, maybe your heart's in the right place. DDT is bad. It's making the egg shell on waterfowl birds thinner and they're being born prematurely. So you ban DDT. Good. Save the birds. But then the DDT was there to kill the mosquitoes. The mosquito population grows. They spread malaria and other diseases, and many more people die because you got rid of the DDT. So it's not wrong to want to ban DDT and to save wetland birds or whatever the story was. I can't remember, but there's nothing wrong with that. But before you do, you have to stop and look at what is down the road and what could possibly happen because of that. And what you need to have that moment where you examine what the implications are in the future. And maybe we're not doing enough of that as a society. I feel like we should be doing more, and it's pretty doable these days.
Yeah.
Why aren't we geared for more of that?
Well, I mean, part of it is what you just mentioned with people being math illiterates. If you don't get a sense of proportion, all things sound good. We should just do all of them. And in some way, that was what the UN did. I also understand the idea. I'd much rather be a politician that stand up and say, you know what, I'm going to do all good things, rather than saying, I'm only going to be the guy who do these 3 good things because they happen to be incredibly effective. It doesn't sound as nice. So we need to sort of get past this sound nice and actually start talking about what does good for the world. The second part, I think, is to a very large extent that there's a difference between what you can do when you're rich and when you're not rich. So very clearly, in rich countries, it was probably a good idea to regulate and possibly even ban DDT. But in poor countries, as you mentioned, where you have lots of mosquitoes and hence malaria that kills your kids, and DDT is much cheaper and much more effective than any other alternative, clearly you possibly shouldn't have banned DDT this soon. You should have focused on other things where you could do much more good for your money. And so we need to have that conversation constantly of saying, where can you actually do a lot of good? So, one of the things I find is when we look across these different areas, there's a few places where you can have an incredible amount of impact. So, some of the longest lines on the chart I showed you. So one of the things we found was nutrition is incredibly important for really small kids. Not only, obviously, it's a bad idea and it's not morally right that anyone starves. But if you get nutrition to small kids, it means that their brains develop more. So when they go to school, even if it's a crappy school, which it probably will be in many developing countries, they will learn more. And so when they get out of school, they will be much more productive and then start a virtuous circle in their countries to make the country richer, pull their own families, but also the societies around them out of poverty. And we actually know that because there was a study done back in the late 1960s, early 70s in Guatemala, where researchers actually went to some small rural villages and gave the kids their good food, and then some other villages not very good food. Of course, this was the 60s. You could get away with doing that, and you shouldn't do that today. But the outcome was that the kids who got good food, we've now gone back and refound those kids there in their late 30s, early 40s, and they just simply have much better lives. They have better marriages, better jobs. If they're women, they have fewer miscarriages. But crucially, they are much better paid because they're just simply much smarter. They learn much more in school. They're much better at pulling their kids and their families out of poverty. So what we found was if you give $1 in nutrition help, you actually lift $45 of social benefit out of this community. That's an incredible achievement. And we have the story. We know how to do that. So again, if we could get those stories out there and realize there's some places where we can do an enormous amount of good, and then there's lots of places where we'll just do a little bit of good. Why don't we start with the enormous good?
I don't know. It scares me that so many adults turned out not to be pragmatic. I've had this conversation over and over again. Like, I just want to do what works. I don't want to politicize everything. Let's focus. And my feeling is if you want to hand out free, clean syringes, and that slows down the spread of HIV in the drug-using community, then so be it. Then somebody figure out the numbers, and then we'll figure out whether we do it or not. We're not going to assign a morality to it. If you find out that more kids at risk can be kept out of prison at, $40,000 a year to be incarcerated by building a couple of after-school programs and basketball courts in their neighborhood, then put the money toward that. I will go any direction you want to go, but let's look at what this does and how much. I mean, imagine how much it costs a society when one kid is in and out of the system, and parole officers and judges and bailiffs and court appointed this and that, mixed with not paying taxes because you're incarcerated. I mean, just one person, and the amount we could have invested in that one kid through after school programs or vouchers or better schools or better system, whatever it is, and the amount that kid would cost if he gets into the system, and then that kid has other kids, and then that kid gets incarcerated, and then their kids get involved with the system. I mean, it's almost endless the amount of money we could spend on one human being versus we spend a little at the beginning, that kid folds himself into society and starts paying taxes and then raising his own kids. It's profound to me. I have no idea why we didn't want to politicize it. We should just figure out what works best and do it. I want to tease, if you're willing to talk about energy. I know we're going to get into climate change and that kind of thing in our next visit, but I would like to get some of your thoughts on energy, and especially as it pertains to some of these developing nations as well, because that's another thing we may do here in the United States, which is like get rid of coal or get rid of gas or let them do wind and solar. And it's like, yeah, they can't do that. Yeah, well, they should. That's a little unfair to them. And that's my editorializing. I'll hit LegalZoom, and then we'll ask Bjorn about energy. Health, safety, it's on everyone's minds these days. You want to make sure your loved ones are protected. LegalZoom, reliable way to set up the right estate plan without leaving your house. You need a last will and testament or living trust. What about an advanced healthcare directive? That's what I was talking about with Dr. Drew the other week. What's a power of attorney? Well, you can't figure it all out on your own. You need to speak to an attorney. Their independent attorney network is there to guide you and advise you. LegalZoom isn't a law firm, but you won't have to pay the expensive billable hours, but they can give you answers. It is LegalZoom, right, Dawson?
Take an important step for your family today. Go to LegalZoom.com and get started on a last will, living trust, and more. Or find out how you can speak to an attorney for advice on the right estate plan. LegalZoom, where life meets legal.
Bjorn, energy. Do you have thoughts on that?
Well, one of the things I think we don't recognize is how much energy matters to us. Matt Ridley in his book asked, why was it fun to be Louis XIV? I'm not sure whether it actually was one, but one of the reasons was he had lots and lots of basically slaves or servants working for him, preparing everything for him. The problem, of course, is that's not sustainable because there's one king and lots of slaves. What we basically managed to do by having lots of energy is that we all have these slaves. So the average person in the US now have the equivalent of servants 24/7, the power of servants 24/7, of about 100 of them, all at your fingertips. Those are the ones that clean your house, that your dishwasher, your washing machine, your Hoover, your Roomba if you have that, and your car and your airplane, and the fact that you get all this good food and all these things that make our lives amazing. That's, of course, what the developing countries want to have as well. And so coming and telling them, you know what, you should just do solar and wind is a little sort of haughty. What is that word?
Hoity.
Hoity-toity. That you're basically telling them you should do what we can now afford to do. What, of course, we do want them to do is eventually switch off from going down a fossil fuel-powered road, because it really does have impacts on climate change. But the only way that we're going to be able to do that is through innovation, as we talked about earlier. If we manage to make green energy cheaper than fossil fuels, of course they will buy that. Of course they will go down that road. But as long as coal and fossil fuels are cheaper than renewables, for instance, they're not likely to do that because they can't afford that extra premium. They want, quite frankly, to become wealthy, and they want to be able to have the same lives as what we have, and I can't say I blame them. So the reality with energy is what has really made our lives better, and it's very clear that the developing world wants to have the same opportunity. What we need to make sure is that we make the innovation possible so that they have less polluting and eventually zero carbon energy. But that's not going to happen right away. That is something that'll take decades to do.
Is it your belief, like we spoke earlier, that in 1974 nobody knew about the catalytic converter, but now it has arrived and has cleaned up the air in Los Angeles? So the air in Los Angeles is much cleaner than it was 40 years ago, even though there's more people and more cars. So do you have a thought about that in terms of technology and energy? Do you think that there's something coming?
So very clearly, innovation is what makes us better off in all kinds of ways, and I think catalytic converter is a wonderful example of that. You're basically asking me to predict what's the future going to do, and I don't know. I see a lot of different proposals on how we could make cheap renewable or cheap clean energy much more available. None of them are cost effective right now. That's why we haven't had that revolution. But it seems it seems almost impossible to me to imagine that we could have a world where we're not going to get one of these many, many innovations through. So Craig Venter, the guy who cracked the human genome back in 2000, he's working on making an algae that basically lives on the ocean surface, takes up sunlight, and produces oil. So we could basically have our own oil fields grown in the ocean where it doesn't really matter for anything else. And it would be carbon neutral because it would just have taken up the CO2 from the atmosphere and then we would burn it in our cars. Imagine that we could have clean and essentially abundant oil that would not be polluting. Now, it doesn't work right now, but we should definitely invest in his research to try to make that happen. And imagine 1,000 people, 1,000 different researchers just like that. We just need one or a few of those to come true. And those are the ones that'll power the rest of the 21st century. So it really is about making sure that we innovate our way through a better future through the catalytic converter back in 1974, but certainly also here in 2020 and onwards.
Yeah, years ago, I spoke to Gale Banks, who's a turbocharging, engine building, diesel kind of guy he's used by the military to the Humvees, I guess, when they would go to, God, I'm trying to think of where we're fighting. We're fighting at a high altitude and Pakistan maybe. And the Humvees there, diesel powered, and they're adding a whole bunch of armor to them. So it had a thinner air and a bunch of weight, and they weren't able to get out of their own way. And so he was tasked with getting more horsepower out of these Humvees using turbocharging and innovations like that. But he was talking to me about algae, biodiesel algae, and sort of vertical farms a while ago, just growing the algae, turning it into biodiesel, sort of what you were discussing. It all sounds promising and it's sort of exciting, really. And I'm pretty optimistic about it. Now, keep in mind, I was sitting around in North Hollywood in 1974, 10 years old, and it was being explained to me that there would be no more fuel in 10 years. And I kept thinking, I'm a car guy. I'm looking forward to my first car. And I was being told to me, you're not going to have a car. You're going to have a donkey.
Well, you'd have like 4 years.
Right.
From 16 there. Yeah.
I'll be having a little bit of fun for about 4 years. But as soon as I hit my 20th birthday, it's over. And then there's the whole OPEC and the gas embargo and Jimmy Carter and Nixon and Ford and everything. And it did look like I was looking at the gas stations. It went from, 37 cents a gallon to $1 a gallon, which seemed unthinkable. And I was like, we may be out of fuel by the time I hit I'm not even going to be able to get a DUI behind the wheel of an automobile because it will not be legal for me to drink and drive, and we will be out of fuel by the time I'm 21. But now it's a completely different world. It's not one we anticipated or predicted, but it should make us feel confident because historically we've always innovated out of problems. Is that a correct statement?
Well, I think it's more true because that's a little bit maybe too optimistic. I think it's more true to say we've innovated ourselves out of many more problems than the extra problems we've created, which is why the world is generally moving in the right direction. But you can't promise that we will find good solutions for everything. Maybe there are things that don't have good solutions, but certainly our track record seems to indicate that we're pretty good at finding smart ways out. If you remember, another thing back from the 1970s was we thought everybody was going to starve because we wouldn't be able to produce more food. What happened was not we were telling everybody, I'm sorry, you have to eat less. But what we actually saw was the Green Revolution, where we managed to produce much more food for every acre of land. That was through technology. We have solved most of our problems through technology, and it seems inconceivable that we're not going to come up with different solutions also for energy. The trick, though, is you have to spend money on it. You have to spend money on researchers, but researchers are incredibly cheaper than the stuff that we're spending right now. We're spending almost nothing on research. We're spending lots and lots of money on subsidizing existing inefficient like solar and wind. So I'm simply pointing out we would do much better by spending that money on research on the Craig vendors of this world to make sure that we actually get the innovations we need.
Well, a positive note to go out on. Is it almost midnight where you are? Or right at midnight?
It is, yeah. Yeah.
Sorry. Thanks for staying up late with me and us.
My pleasure.
The book, which is will be available on July 14th, but you can pre-order it now on Amazon. It's called False Alarm: How Climate Change Panic Cost us trillions, hurt the poor, and fails to fix the planet. That's coming out on the 14th. Bjorn will come back and rejoin us. We'll talk about, we'll also have an update when we talk in, a couple of months about where we're at with this whole coronavirus thing. And I think by then, a lot of information coming out of Sweden and other places will probably be a little more easier to substantiate, a little more concrete, and a little less fluid. Hey, Bjorn, thank you very much for joining me. That was a fast,
Adam, it was wonderful to talk to you.
Hour. Well, we'll talk soon. All right. Thank you, Bjorn. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Let's see. Good Sports is coming up. You can go to, I'm doing a live event in Houston, May 21st through the 23rd. We're going to do a live podcast there, and we're going to do some stand-up shows as well. And the money's all going to charity. So it'll be a chance for you guys to check that out. And you can check out our YouTube page, youtube.com/Adam Carolla, and you can check out the stand-up clips as well. I'm your emotional support animal. It's available for pre-order as we speak. It's coming out on the 16th, so get that. It just helps. And until next time, Adam Carolla for Gina Grad and Bald Bryan and Bjorn Lomborg saying mahalo.